I'm watching the blue light. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this third Cloudebate here at the University of Johannesburg. Some of you have been with us before and registered online and watched us online and been with us through the other debates that we've had. And I hope that we have both old and new viewers at home with us tonight. Because tonight we're going to talk about something that we haven't really touched upon, or we've touched upon it in our previous debate, but we haven't had really that much time to deliberate on it. And that is, are we really digitally equal in this new environment of, or in the context of Industry 4.0 and in our society, and a sort of broader discussion around the fourth industrial revolution. So that's the question for tonight, and we're going to, with me as usual, I have a panel of experts that's going to help me deliberate and develop this topic a bit further and hopefully go into depth and answer the question, not only about are we digitally equal, but what we can do about it as well. My name is Ylva Rodney Gomeda, and I'm a professor of journalism here at the University of Johannesburg. And right next to me, I have Dudu Makwanasi. Lovely to have you with us, Dudu. And Dudu is the CEO of a project, a non-profit organization called Project Izizwe. And Izizwe works to facilitate free Wi-Fi and access to digital communications and digital communications platforms in low-income communities. And I hope you will deliberate more on that and tell us more about the project as well tonight. So lovely to have you here, Dudu.
Thank you for having me.
And next to Dudu, we have Ryan Smith, who is the managing director of BMIT, which is a research and consulting firm that works broadly in the digital industry and with ICTs. Lovely to have you with us, Ryan.
Thank you for having me.
Very much welcome. And right next to Ryan, we have Chris Borain, who has flown up from Cape Town to be with us. It's lovely. Thanks for that, Chris. And Chris is the chairperson of the IAB, which is the Interactive Advertising Bureau of South Africa. And he's also the general manager of One Republic Private Marketplace, which is a digital sales platform. Lovely to have you with us,
Thank you
Chris.
very much for inviting me.
And last but not least, at the very end of the table, we have my colleague here at UJ, Dr. Wesley Dawsonry, who is the senior lecturer in electrical engineering and works on intelligence systems. Very, very warm welcome to you as well. It's lovely to have you here, Wesley.
Pleased to be here.
All right. I'd like to kick off the discussion tonight by asking the very, very, very broad and quite open question, but important question. Are we digitally equal? I want to turn women first. Dudu, are we digitally equal?
No. and we're not. We're not if we're looking at the fact that, particularly in the South African context, the cost of data, the cost of mobile data is expensive, particularly for people in low-income communities. And it was the Alliance for Affordable Internet that released their report on the affordability report this year. And it says Africans spend at least 5% of their average income on the cost of data. Now, if you're looking at a South African context with families that earn between 600 to 1,500, that's half of their income that's going to mobile data. So we're not digitally equal, and it's in such an exploitative and excruciating and an upsetting thing that people in low-income communities aren't able to afford opportunities. We're not looking at it as affording the cost of data. It is, if you can afford data, you can afford opportunities, and therefore you can afford to be empowered. And as it stands right now, the majority of the country cannot afford opportunities and therefore cannot afford to be empowered. So the work that we do at Project Izizwe is we advocate for digital inclusion, and I suppose that's why I said no, we're not, because we're continuously advocating for digital inclusion, particularly for people in low-income communities. All our projects are obviously subsidized by the private and public entity our argument is that it's not just the government's responsibility to bridge the digital divide, it's everyone's responsibility that has the financial muscles and that has the resources. Because the whole world is moving towards digitalization. We're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. I had an opportunity to go to the US for a 10-day trip around different industries, and everyone talks about 5G. If we're talking about 5G and there are areas in South Africa that don't even have 2G, we are in trouble. And so we need to talk about how we can all work together to bridge this divide. And as we grow different technologies and different ways to be innovative, and as we adopt the Internet of Things, that we also simultaneously work on our infrastructure lack, and we also work on the pricing of the cost of data.
No, thank you for that, Dudu. And I think that, access, of course, is hugely important, and providing access. And we'll come back to that now. I'd like us to touch upon things around how we can improve access as well. But Brian, do you agree? Or do you
No, I certainly do agree. South Africa certainly has a large digital divide. In fact, a good example is, the price of 1 gigabyte of mobile data is approximately 150 Rand. But you can get uncapped fiber internet for around 500 Rand, right? But the gap between affording 150 Rand per month and 500 Rand is significant, especially in this economy. There are a lot of people cannot afford 500 Rand per month to get that access. And it's very different what you can achieve once you have uncapped broadband versus 1 gig of data.
Yes.
There's significant differences in that, whether it's education, I mean the amount of content online that allows people to learn things via videos these days, free videos on YouTube, on other platforms, could enable people who aren't skilled at the moment to learn skills by themselves without paying any money for it other than the cost of the data. So there certainly is a massive digital divide, and unfortunately, with the fourth industrial revolution, where more and more, let's say, human jobs are going to be using technology and guiding technology, without South Africans being technologically literate, we are going to fall further and further behind the rest of the world. So it is seriously something that needs to be looked at, and there are a number of different things that the public sector specifically, and in some cases the private sector or the public-private partnerships are doing to try and address this. But we still have problems in South Africa around spectrum allocation as one of the big constraints, which fortunately is now looking to be addressed. We have a new telecoms or telecommunications minister, very, very new one, and Cyril Ramaphosa has already spoken about wanting to allocate this additional spectrum. So hopefully that will allow data prices to fall, and in fact the mobile networks have said if they get spectrum they can bring down data prices, but we'll wait and see about that. But it is completely necessary. I mean, we cannot look to be a competitive force on this continent, and certainly not in the world, if we don't have the oil in the economy, lubricating the cogs of the economy, which is information and data, and access to data. So we have a great divide, and I think we have to work together to solve it, and it does appear that at least at the very top there is some impetus in terms of addressing this specifically, and hopefully 2019 is the year where we see real progress.
I like that. So 2019, sort of, we'll definitely work towards that. I'm going to turn to you, Chris. You represent a lot of commercial interest, I imagine.
Correct.
And where do you stand with this? Do you see the divide as well?
So divide is very, very great and unequal in the current market, and as representing both publishers and agencies, any growth in internet access is good for all of us, because it enables more and more people to read the content that we provide, from newspapers, any form of entertainment content, but also educational content. So the greater the access to data, the greater the access to internet connectivity, the more people are able to learn and grow and develop. Which then turns into a win for advertising agencies, because their business opportunities that flow out of that. But I think we just, if we're sitting at the tip of the continent, and our data, and I think everybody has said that already, our data costs are so high, we're just penalizing ourselves further and further. We still do have great access to mineral wealth, but unless we have access to intellectual capital wealth, as a country, we're going to fall further and further behind. Our economic growth rate is going to stagnate, and our unemployment rate is going to increase. So, as Ryan said, it's incumbent on us to do something quickly, and hopefully 2019 is the year that we do something quickly. There is political will. The ANC have made it one of their charter points to make sure that there is universal access to internet. And the United Nations has declared it a basic human right. So with that, why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we, making more of an effort to create those opportunities?
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Chris. And I think that it's interesting. I'm just watching what's happening online in discussion, and Masiki is saying, yes, Dudu is absolutely correct. The cost of data is ridiculously expensive and prohibitive to low-income communities. And I think that's the baseline, and you've all emphasized that. Wesley, what do you see in this space?
Thanks, Prof. And good evening to everyone joining us. I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective. Yeah. I think we need to think about things in a little bit broader. Much of the discourse surrounding digital inequality has been focused towards data access, data costs, public access. And let's try and imagine for a moment that we wake up tomorrow and we have free, unlimited access. Could we really say that we're digitally equal then? While connectivity alone is a condition for digital participation, it's not sufficient to ensure that everyone has kind of equitable rights as a citizen, consumer, and a producer. So we need to look at it from a different angle and say, how do we empower people to actually make that access impactful and sustainable? So we look at some of the Wi-Fi programs, free Wi-Fi programs. A good example is the Digital Ambassador Program. Yes. That was in partnership with UJ and the city, and that worked well. But we need to extend that, and to have much more reach. And we need people to be able to access the digital economy. So how do we do that? One of the things we started here at UJ was free classes that we ran every Saturday. And we challenged ourselves. We said it will be open to anyone, so anyone could come. And we found that the feedback we got afterwards, and we were teaching basically philosophies of machine learning, concepts behind it. We found that some of the suggestions, some of the creative and innovative thinking that had come after they had gained this new knowledge was things that we would have never thought about. So they had access to those resources before they came to us, online videos and so on. But only with that kind of knowledge, it was a stepping stone to activate and stimulate creativity, entrepreneurship, and so on. So I think we need to look at it from a different perspective and not just focus on the condition for digital participation.
Yeah. We have Jonathan who says online here that I agree with Wesley's thoughts. Connectivity is a ticket through the gate. It is not the silver bullet solution, but it is a ticket. It's something to open doors, and I think that is important. So I want to stay with the question of then that broader idea of education, or giving, growing a knowledge base. I was just at a conference, a Media Innovators Conference in Zambia, with a lot of people from around the continent, and what struck me was the innovations happening on the continent, and young startups in particular, really, really exciting in the media field. And I was thinking that, to that kind of, firstly you need, of course, the knowledge, the know-how, how to do it. You need access to startup finance, capital. You need the education, some kind of an educational background and some kind of digital literacy. I mean, you need broader literacies as well, of course. But then also to foster that kind of idea of creativity, a spirit of innovation is also hugely important, I think, in this space. But just in terms of the education, what are your thoughts there? Duda, I'll turn to you again.
So, we're very, well, I'm passionate about education, and I'm passionate mostly about digital education. So you're right, and I have to agree with Wesley, is that the internet, the access to the internet is just the door in. What's critical, and I think Chris would agree, is the content thereof, the minute you are online. I think there's plenty of content, and I speak because the work that we do at ECs, where when our users connect to the free Wi-Fi, they immediately get redirected onto the content portal. And we've partnered with various content partners that create e-learning content, job opportunities, and there's a lot of content out there. The question is, especially in education, how certified is it? You're seeing there's a lot of courses that are not certified, which is great because it challenges your mind. But if one were to take these courses, how far does it lead you as a professional? Is it accredited? Can you use it? And also around education and content, can the user, and particularly I speak for people in low-income communities, can they engage with the language on the content? And I found earlier in the year we were approached by another research company within the space, and they were saying, well, we have this program that teaches young people to code and create their own portal. And I said, well, great, let's do a POC with me and let's start it and we'll see. And I couldn't even get through the second part of it because the language was even difficult for me with a master's degree in political science to understand. So when we talk about education and pushing educational content online, we have to think about language first and foremost, and we have to think about the credibility of the content that we're pushing online and how relevant is it to the communities that we're trying to empower.
Education needs to be pitched at the right levels, and language in many ways is important there. We've had these discussions before on the panels that we've had. So, but let's come back to that. I'm very happy. We actually have, Wesley, you're not the last man on the table anymore. We have a new panelist who just joined us. Lovely to have you here. Aniso Sharamba, welcome. And you're a technology strategist at Altron, BSI, and we are going to come to you now and query you on some of the questions that we've already...
It's all good. I'm just glad I made it here for most of this. I have a story.
Good.
I have a story.
Yeah. Maybe self-driving cars would have been a solution here? Or
believe
no?
me, where I was, self-driving cars would have been an awful mess.
It would have been an awful mess. Okay. Aniso, since you came, actually, let me go to you. One of the first, and the panel tonight, as you know, the discussion is all about equality in the digital space. And the broader question that we're asking is, are we digitally equal in light of the fourth industrial revolution and what it needs in terms of actually human resources and knowledge, know-how, and so forth. What are your thoughts on that, Aniso? Do you have any?
I don't know if I have thoughts so much as an opinion, because my first response would be, I don't think that there is equality, but you'd have to take a step back and ask what your definition of equality actually is. Is it access to the data itself? Is it the access to opportunities? And in that regard, equality, depending on the spectrum of people that you're dealing with, it means different things to different people. So if depending on the education level that you come out of with after your educational career, your definition of what equality to data means hugely differs with somebody that comes out of graduate school, because the whole world may be their oyster. They may be looking at international opportunities versus somebody that stopped at high school, and they may be looking at what vocational opportunities exist for me and how can I leverage data to that. So the idea of equality is an amorphous one, but my immediate response would be I don't really think that it's an equal society or play field for anybody at this point.
No, we're talking about education and how important education is in this space. And I think that there's something, we see it, and Wesley, you were talking about opening up the classroom, giving extra lessons, providing openness. But I think also it starts much earlier in life, and often, early childhood education and primary school education needs to be focused on these things, but which might be rendered null and void if we don't have access, then data access and so on, of course, as well. But in terms of human resources, and I'm looking at Chris and Ryan here now, what is needed in this space?
Human resources in what sense?
So education-wise, what is it that we need to foster? What is it that we need to do?
So an interesting thing is, if you look at the fourth industrial revolution, which is, we are into at least the beginning of it, one observation is that in the future, the types of jobs that are going to be more in demand from a human perspective that wouldn't have been replaced by intelligence or artificial intelligence are ones, in fact, that are more specific around human qualities, things like creativity, in fact, things like engaging with other people. And it's quite interesting because we live in a society these days where more and more people are burying their heads into their devices, becoming very, very isolated from other people. And it has been noted that a lot of, younger people who are coming into the workforce now actually battle with those types of social skills and things like that. So one of the, when people make suggestions of, the types of things that we should be educating people through digital mediums are things like coding, etc.
Yes.
There certainly is value in that. However, I would say that there is still a huge amount of education in the broader sense, not just education into technology, that can take place through the medium of technology around things that can foster those more human characteristics or human skills. Because in 10 years from now, people won't be coding the way that we code at the moment. People will be talking to some voice assistant, and the voice assistant will be translating their human voice into some programming language. So the challenge with the fourth industrial revolution specifically is things changing so rapidly that even now it's difficult to know what to teach people, and that even the technologies which we have now, teaching them to preschool kids may not even be useful later in life. It's not to say that the concepts aren't useful. Things like coding are very, very useful, not in the sense of you learning a programming language, but you're learning logic, and logic is an important thing to understand throughout the rest of your life, and will always be important. But I do see that those softer skills, if they can somehow, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but almost be taught through a digital medium, those will also be very, very valuable in the future.
Interesting. So to narrow down the discussion about education, it's more about skills. Would you agree with that, Chris? What would those skills be?
I think yes and no. There's what access allows you to do is also gain access to a broader spectrum of people. So you're not only reliant on learning skills from your immediate environment. If you're able to access a YouTube video, if you're able to access a class teaching innovation and entrepreneurship from South Korea or from the United States of America, that's what internet access to me gives you. It doesn't narrow you down. It broadens you up and allows you to explore your own world. But I also agree with Ryan in the fact that the softer skills are going to be the more important skills. It'll allow us to work with other humans, to interact with other humans, and to learn from them. And in doing that, so engage and start creating your own opportunities. But I think, to Wesley's point, I think, and we've all spoken about this earlier, internet access is the gateway. Without that, you don't have anything. And I think let's get that right. There are a lot of things that we need to do post that. We need to provide educational standards, because there will be, there'll be people coming and offering courses that won't meet various standards, and those that won't actually teach anybody anything anyway. We need to teach people about safety on the internet. What is fake? What is real? How to see the difference in those. You as a journalism professor would know that. Fake news is something that's very prevalent in the world at the moment. Brand safety, how you keep people in an environment which is trusted. And all those aspects make up an important part of digital access, as do getting the right content in front of people, making sure that the standards are right, and then letting them explore. Letting them explore, and language, to your earlier point, is critical. If we're only teaching in English, we're certainly not going to help. We need to be broadening the base. We have a number of official languages. We should be teaching people in those number of official languages when we can, when there is opportunity to do that, whether that's subtitles or whatever that is, but just allowing people to learn at their own pace, but seeing the same concepts and making those concepts universal.
It's interesting because I've online here now as well. Actually, we have both Masiki and Jonathan who's been with us and throughout the debate here, and it's talking about just exactly these. You know, there's a whole cluster of things that we need to solve, and it's not an either-or scenario. You know, and of course, access is going to be the major issue. But we can provide access, but if we don't have the literacies, then that's, you know, that might not be everything. So, Anisu, what are your thoughts on it?
I've been listening to what everybody's been saying, and I completely agree with what everybody said. I think it's one of those issues where do you start fixing it to get everybody equal access? Because there is an element of giving people access to the right skills. There is an element of making sure that those skills are relevant from a local level to regional to an international level. So education is important. And there's an element of infrastructure play as well, and government policy, because that plays into it as well. Who takes the lead on that? Because a lot of the, if I understand this correctly, a lot of the coverage that allows for connectivity is determined on a market basis as opposed to the best interest of the public basis. So wherever the market is where the coverage will be. Therefore, that by definition excludes certain elements of the population from access to data. So because it's not a public policy issue to the extent that it should be, access to data is restricted on a profit basis. So it's basically that element of who takes the lead on that front. And because it's primarily driven from a profit motive, because there are shareholders that everybody has to answer to, it's then also a case of what can be done to lower the cost to make access cheaper for everybody that does have access. And then the other vector to that everybody at some point will need to address is, if cost is taken care of and infrastructure is taken care of, who should take the lead on that? If you leave it to companies, they will do what's in the interest of their shareholders. If you leave it to government, it becomes a case of how do they finance that, because they have other responsibilities from education to healthcare as well. So I agree with everyone. I guess my question to everybody would be, it's such a big issue to tackle that who takes the lead, how, when, and as somebody's taking the lead, where does that leave the country in relation to the rest of the world?
I mean, those are really important questions. So we did, Dudu, you mentioned it first, I think, this idea of public-private partnerships, and Ryan and Chris as well, which are hugely important, but how do you furnish that? How do you actually then, because what Anisa is pointing out is that there might be different interests at play. So is it a government that has to take the lead on this and tell the private sector what to do? I don't know. Chris, do you have any thoughts on?
I'm never in favor of government taking the lead and informing, where it should happen, because I think what happens then is there are different forces at play. I think in all of this, it needs to be a partnership. So if I, as a commercial player, want to offer free Wi-Fi access in the urban areas, to get that access, I should be offering that in the rural areas. So everything that you do comes with it's not just a one-size-fits-all or a one opportunity. We're going to be offering it here. The opportunity cost for you to do that is by offering it in a different area to a different market. And I think that there are a number of ways of funding this, whether it be grant funding, whether it be just purely commercial funding and advertising-based funding. And I think we've got to sit down and work out those funding models sooner rather than later, because if we fight around that and we go, okay, well, we're going to wait for government to take the lead, or we're going to wait for commercial to take the lead, nobody's going to take the lead. We're all going to sit back and wait. So I think we've got to strike while the iron's hot. We've got to strike while next year's election year. Government and political parties are going to be making promises that they can't hopefully afford to do half the time, but we've got to make them stick to it. You've got to say, you've said that universal internet access is a key policy decision.
Yeah.
What's the next step? Let's work together to create that, to create free internet access, to allow minimum downloads a day, to allow people to access educational infrastructure or educational programs. We've got the opportunity next year because everybody's going to be wanting to really attract the electorate and make them want to, vote for them, and so that's how we do it.
Do you agree with that, Dudu?
I've been nodding the whole time. He basically just took all our model and said it in one word. I think private-public partnerships is what ICISO has been doing for the last 4 years now. And again, sustainability is very key. I think for every non-for-profit, whether you're focusing on digital access or you're focusing on education or empowering women who are homeless, I think if you're a non-for-profit or if you're a social enterprise, you need to look at sustainability. And around public access, sustainability has been an issue. Having been in the space for the past 5 years, at Project ICISO, we understand there's no silver bullet to it. There's definitely different avenues that we can look at, and we have been testing different sustainable revenue models, and it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting in a sense that, and I'll probably challenge Chris on this. We've looked at advertising, which is one of. That's what everyone sells. I mean, I was in New York early this year, and Link NYC saying they're funding their New York public Wi-Fi with advertising. And I was like, great. How are you doing it? Because we've been struggling for the past 5 years in South Africa. With advertisers, it boils down, and correct me if I'm wrong, it boils down to filling the inventory. It also boils down with the LSM of the advertisers. Is it the target market that they're looking at? And where we have these public access networks, the LSM isn't particularly what is attractive to the advertiser, right? So you're looking at you growing this network, you have people connected, and how are you making this sustainable? When you reach out to an advertiser and they say, oh, not my target market, this is a lower LSM. Right? And so that's become, again, it goes back to let's try other sustainable revenue models. I'm completely open to advertising. I'm a propeller of advertising. But the question is, how do we make it work? And how do we get advertisers on board to understand that? And I get really passionate about this because the biggest consumers are people in low-income communities. And a lot of our hotspots are in public areas where at taxi ranks, at not shopping malls, at community centers, even at police stations. And that's where people congregate, and that's where people purchase things. So again, it goes back, it is people in low-income communities that prepay for data, and they are the ones that pay more, as opposed to people who are rich that pay rarely less. So again, advertisers, are you willing to partner with public access partners to make public access sustainable? Because filling the inventory and then the lower LSMs just probably does not fit your spec of the line.
I don't think that's the answer at all, actually. I think, well, not that we don't want to fill those advertising slots. I think, firstly, there is no silver bullet for everything. There has to be a mix of models in there. But secondly, you're right, people in lower income groups, well, they purchasers. They buy the same goods as everybody else does. Coca-Cola is going to be wanting to hit them, there are a number of different advertising opportunities that you can get. I think it's speaking to the right salespeople and having those salespeople speak to the right advertising agencies and the right brands and the right partnerships, because partnerships ultimately will make this happen.
I think just on that point, one of the challenges, though, is in the digital advertising space is that there's a glut of inventory, right? A lot of people, or a lot of businesses who think, well, we have all these eyeballs and we've got this advertising space and we count up our impressions and we work out how much we can sell each impression for, and now we've funded our whole model. The challenge is that a lot of people are doing that. There's more inventory than what there is demand, certainly. And most publishers, publishers who are producing content and drawing huge amounts of eyeballs to their websites are also struggling. You see, digital divisions of certain publishers having to downsize because there isn't enough demand. Unfortunately, this is one of the challenges with the changing way of advertising. as a lot of advertising moves into social or moves into other different environments off of these presences, it makes it more difficult for any person who has advertising inventory to monetize it. And I think that's more of the concern than anyone particularly having any issue with the eyeballs and Project to Seize Where. I think there's certainly lots of advertisers that want to go after.
So that is a bit of a flaw in the model, but yeah, I'm glad that you highlighted that, Dudu. And he said you're dying to say something on that point.
Oh, it's not so much that I'm dying to say anything. I think to do just how passionate you got about the entire revenue model.
Yeah.
Usually there's a mic drop moment in most of the debates where somebody could just be like, yeah, I'm done. It doesn't work. That was it. I don't have anything. Yes, you're right. It's a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. But I mean, it's how do we solve access? So private partnership, there are models that you've been working with. There are things in the advertising space that could fit into that model, managed correctly and so on. Wesley, do you agree? How do we facilitate access? Is it just about private partnership? Are there other issues to think about?
Yeah, I've just been listening to a lot of the ideas and suggestions. We tend to go to government as well, always. There's a whole issue around spectrum and the regulator and so on.
Yeah.
So I think we have some really good policies. We do. We have some really good policies, but we don't really see them through. The reason being is what was mentioned. All stakeholders need to be engaged. And I haven't heard any suggestion or any model about engaging the people that's using the their access, and how would they come up with any ideas on how they think they could sustain it in their community. I think that would be interesting to find out, because we always talk about kind of the give a man a fish model. It's only going to last for a certain amount of time. What about teaching him to fish? He won't go hungry. So there's also elements, and I want to come back to the education part. It went to education, but I mentioned knowledge. Knowledge is a very important part of it. So the other aspects is not necessarily looking at skills, but better living. So you could look at access to the municipal services that you have around through this free public Wi-Fi, access to job portals, access to programs in the DST, Department of Labor, the NRF, and innovation agencies, finding out how they can get to innovation hubs, for example. So you're trying to build something more than just access around the access, and in that way we can start looking at different models where the people that are using it can begin to think about how they will sustain it instead of waiting for the access to continue.
I mean, it's interesting, you and I are both, university lecturers, and university campuses are microcosmoses of the world. So, if you can find the right partnerships that can sponsor university projects, maybe that's, a good way to start somewhere. Because what I want to ask is there a tipping point here where then access and education meet and we have some kind of, a real kind of, opening up of this space and where we can really do fantastic things and where we've generated enough know-how that it sort of, becomes sustainable and feeds itself. Any thoughts on that? A tipping point?
So we have a project. So I mentioned we do private-public partnerships. We have a project with another non-for-profit called aware.org. And aware.org is a non-for-profit that advocates against underage drinking. And Aware reached out to Seize Where sometime last year, and they said, well, the whole world is going digital. And we've partnered with other partners, there's 6 other partners around research, around education, and around content. And we want a partnership with Isizwe to roll out free Wi-Fi hotspots in Bushbuckridge and Botshabelo. So this is in the Nelspruit and the Free State. And we want to use this free Wi-Fi hotspots as an enabler for our intervention program against anti-underage drinking. And it's been such an amazing program to observe, because we as Project Isizwe walk in, we partner with the local ISP, we do the deployment, and we plug in the portal that's zero-rated, that the users, that's the first point of contact before the user can browse. And what Aware then does is they push all this content around underage drinking and the dangers of underage drinking. And some of these hotspots, we've deployed some of the routers at the schools, and with the other partners that they have that are linked to the educational program. So we've had multiple stakeholder engagements also with the Department of Education in these two regions. And so they've taken this anti-underage drinking campaign and incorporated it into life orientation. So it's like an extramural activity for life orientation. But the results thus far, I mean, we have 12 months to do this, and we're not done yet, we're almost there. But it's been amazing and mind-boggling as to how access and education around a particular, underage drinking is what we're doing now, has just changed not only the culture within the community, but within the school. So I got an email from one of the teachers a few months ago, and she said, you know what, I'm so grateful for the free Wi-Fi, because we used to get a lot of absenteeism, and now a lot of kids are coming to school because we allow them to now use their devices and interact with the program. And now there's free Wi-Fi at school, so who wouldn't want to come to school? And we've then deployed these free Wi-Fi hotspots around the spaza shops and the tech shops. And again, to go back to Wesley's point, the communities guard these hotspots. And where we are with aware.org is that this is a proof of concept. They want to get information, and they're doing research around how internet access can be an enabler for an intervention program, and other points around that. But once the program is done, we go back to sustainability. And I like Aware's thinking is, how do we then turn this funded model, the subsidized model, and create and make it into a community network? So what we do at Project Isizwe, we work with another social enterprise called the Social Collective, where we've taken young people, we call them Wi-Fi ambassadors, and we've trained them, and they work with the local ISP that we work with. The idea is that towards the end of this, these ambassadors can know how to drive this, and therefore run this as a community network. But it's been very interesting to see how the community of both Bushbuckridge and Botshabelo interact with us. And these are peri-rural communities. I mean, Bushbuckridge, in a day, we get about 1,400 users on just these 15 hotspots.
So I have two questions that I want to pose, and they're sort of coming out from the questions that are being fed to me here online as well, and the discussion that's ongoing online. I mean, firstly, I'm going to come back to data costs and how we can deal with data costs and keep them lower. But there's one question here as well about platforms and devices. So, yes, free Wi-Fi access, but what about devices? Not everyone has access to smartphones and so on. And there's a question being fed here by Jonathan that says, does digitally equal have to be internet and smartphone based from the get-go? Sure, it's sexy, he says, but what about utilizing simpler access such as USSD and WAP? Any thoughts on that? I see you nodding, Wesley.
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest that. I think the devices is probably a huge, well, you can do amazing things with a smartphone right now, if you have one. And I know there are programs where we have, give iPads to kids and so on. So, but that's once again not sustainable. It can't be broad and wide, the reach. So we should start looking very seriously at lowering the cost of devices. And of course, that points to local production, local manufacturing, local production, which has its own challenges. But there have been some success stories with that, particularly with mobile phones. And it's an ongoing thing. But definitely driving the cost of devices down. is certainly a condition also for participation. Yeah.
I just think on that point, certainly agree that the cost of the device is also very much a barrier. The idea of saying, well, can we use USSD, WAP and things like that, there is some merit in that, but at the same time, you're still maintaining quite a digital divide by only allowing a certain type of access versus smartphone, where there's obviously possibilities.
Sorry, Ryan, can I interrupt you? Can you explain to us what is USSD and VAP?
Okay, well, WAP was a protocol which was used a number of years ago, and I don't know to what extent it's still used today, but USSD, for 2G devices. But USSD, people use it commonly when you want to check your airtime balance or something, and you enter a star, number, code, and a hash, and then you can access menus of information through that mechanism that doesn't actually rely on the type of data that we're talking about now. But one interesting idea is, why not making certain low-end smartphone devices VAT exempt? So you actually say, let's make these devices VAT exempt, not make people pay 15% extra. And the government can actually do that quite easily. Whether they want to do it or not is different, or whether they can afford to do it or not. But it's quite a simple mechanism to actually make a certain type of device.
Interesting.
And it might be that it's local devices only, if you want to stimulate that environment. I mean, there was very recently, or this year, a smartphone factory launched down in East London. So there are these types of things that are happening, and certainly getting more of these data-enabled or smart devices into people's hands is important as that first step of the journey.
So what are the barriers towards lowering data cost and, lower cost then for devices? Any thoughts on that from you? Any panelist?
Everybody's looking at me.
So I have some comments, but
I think we've all touched on it broadly, like when we talk about cheaper access to devices or producing devices locally, it's basically saying that there's an element of the invisible hand, the markets at play. And it was such that, 5, 6, 10 years ago, a smartphone was impossible for anybody to have. Now it's not unheard of to pick up a Show Me Chinese phone for 1,500 Rand, and you're connected to the internet, or less, and connected to the internet immediately. And that's a lot of money, but it's the point there is that 5 years ago there was a whole demographic segment of the market that didn't have access to the internet. Now, because of the market at play, prices have dropped to the extent that people can jump on, and it's unfortunate that there probably does need to be some element of government intervention to make sure that everybody can get access to devices. But I'm something of a firm believer in saying sometimes letting the market work itself out will eventually drive down costs, provided that there is sufficient competition in there, provided that other elements are enabled, whether it's a case of spectrum allocation or data migration that therefore opens up that lane so that smaller players can come in. And elements like that eventually do drive down costs. The issue there is, how long does that take, and can people wait for that to happen?
And in an economy such as ours, it's highly divided and highly racialized as well. I think, we know that we often have a problem of fueling the economy. There are barriers there, and so startup capital. We mentioned it earlier. Where can that come from? If we want to locally produce devices, for example, where do we get the funding? Where do we get the money?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of different avenues to take. I mean, I'm pretty certain that the DTIs would be a supporter of those types of efforts. And again, the private sector certainly comes to the party in that regard as well. And in fact, I mean, different types of ways of funding these different mechanisms. In some cases, I've even heard of the fact that the money saved in certain stock files have been used to actually help kick some of these very digital projects off the ground. So there is a wide range of avenues. I mean, in South Africa, we don't necessarily have the same type of culture around angel investors and things like that. So it's very difficult for people who don't have a business that's already running to get additional funding. So that's one of the challenges that we face. But I do see that there are certain funds typically aimed at SMEs as well. There's a technology fund, I can't recall, but it's in the Western Cape that just recently made an investment, I think it was this week, as one of their first investments into the tech space. So the hope is that we see a bit more of that.
Yeah. Chris?
Media 24 have just launched a R1.5 billion technology investment fund as well. So there's a lot of money that's at play there. Just to get back to the handsets again, I again would be a firm believer in the hand of the market, as opposed to if we can get and import phones cheaply, good quality phones cheaply from our partners, other members of the BRICS nations. China are able to deliver them at a significantly cheaper cost than we can do now. I think the important aspect for me is get devices into the hands of people, get internet access. We will grow the technology, we will grow the development of new industries, of new opportunities for people, and then let people like NASPAF, who have this R1.5 billion fund, let them climb in and encourage innovation and entrepreneurship, give people access to education, that they then go, well, these are the opportunities, this is what we can do. And I think it is always going to be, there has to be the hidden hand of the market, but also the very visible hand of government intervention to go, we need to go this way. We need to legislate that there will be free internet access. Right, market won't do it.
So the policy environment.
So and I think we do have a very, very strong policy environment. These things are in place already. It's now, it's taking the bull by the horns and making sure that the policy framework and guidelines are implemented.
Wesley, I see you have some thoughts there as well.
I think just looking at, for example, the energy space. Previously we had this similar issues. It's cheaper to import some of the solar PV panels. And one of the things that drove the cost down tremendously globally and in South Africa is our renewable energy independent power producer bidding process, the model. And it was a very innovative model. It worked really well. It helped to drive the prices down. So something similar, instead of having the difficulties with the manufacturing, drawing in competitors from the international sector.
We still face the problem, though, of high data costs, and it comes up in discussions online again and again and again. But what about the data costs? How can we lower the cost of data? And maybe you should ask, why are they so high?
It depends on which segment of the market you're looking at, but I think most people, when they talk about data cost, they're specifically looking at mobile data. And there's a number of different reasons that many people will give you around why data costs are very high. If they're the mobile networks, they'll specifically say, well, one of the biggest constraints is the spectrum, and it is true that South Africa is lagging immensely in terms of allocating spectrum, and that the challenge with that is to maintain certain standards on their networks. They have to employ quite complex, quite expensive upgrades to the existing towers, just so that they can provide the same level of service over a very small amount of spectrum that they might have. So that's the one side of the story. The other side of the story is, mobile networks have existed for let's just say 20 years in South Africa, and have been very, very profitable organizations for a very long time that have shareholders that expect certain levels of profit, right? And if you are an executive at one of those organizations, it is very difficult to now start reducing costs like that. And the challenge is, the problem is, especially for the large networks, because it's not that competitive in South Africa, because we have two quite large players and the other guys are quite small. What you find is that the small guys might reduce their prices to try and get some customers, and in some cases they're fairly successful with that. But the bigger players are very reluctant to drop their prices even to match that, because what happens is that even though they're losing a few customers, the net loss that they'll make by dropping their data prices across their entire customer base is significantly greater than the small loss that they're making by losing customers. So they would rather lose a few customers here and there due to that process than bring data prices down across the board. So it is quite difficult in that regard. So government is spent a lot of time thinking about what to do in this, and then there is a new ECA Amendment Act looking at communications, which is very, very, very hotly debated, and is probably going to be challenged in court, almost certainly so. And one of the ideas is that the government has is to introduce what is called a wireless open access network, which is to create a wholesale layer to the mobile network where other players can then come and be almost like a mobile ISP and offer a mobile network type service without necessarily having the infrastructure. They get it from a wholesale provider. And this is in the mind of government and in people who advocate for it, hopefully would allow a sort of control of the base costs and make sure that infrastructure isn't duplicated where it shouldn't be duplicated, and allow more competition in that environment, like what we've seen in the fixed line, let's say fiber environment, where there is this wholesale model with an ISP layer on top. It's a very, very contentious debate at the moment, of the most contentious.
So we're running out of time, so to try to wrap up the discussion, 2019 was mentioned as a crucial year. Something's going to happen in 2019. We have Ryan, you presented a view here of some government initiatives that that could work, and the open access network then that might have ripple effect. Any other big things that you think are necessary or are already happening and that need to happen for that decisive moment in 2019? Dudu?
So I think, with Project Isizo, we're all for the WOAN. We believe in the WOAN. I think I've written so many letters to DTVS and the Minister back, like how we're passionate about the WOAN. I think we have a monopoly problem, and working with local wireless internet service providers, we believe wireless is cheaper and it's easy to disrupt. And I feel where mobile network operators don't quite see that is because data is really addictive, is that if you're at a local public hotspot and you're connected to wireless access, which is cheaper and it's way better and more affordable than fiber connectivity. Once you move away from the public hotspot, because you're so used to the activity on the phone, you will eventually start using your mobile data. I think that is the message that mobile network operators need to understand, that sharing and opening spectrum and also just allowing wireless ISPs to piggyback on infrastructure, because I would know we work a lot with these wireless internet service provider. It's just difficult to put up a mask in a place that's not connected. And I think another thing is in areas like the Northern Cape where there is no connectivity, there's almost no fiber, in areas like Pof Ada and Kemus and Kakamus, is that let us look at other initiatives and let us include that in policies, right? So ICASA needs to act very fast around allowing the test of TV white space and let's look at other technologies like satellite that will then use wireless as backhaul to connect those that are not connected, as opposed to using traditional fiber.
So that's a government approach then, and just like Ryan said. Chris, and any last
I would hold all
thoughts?
the politicians to account.
Yes.
So in every single promise that they make leading into the election, and in every single promise that they've made leading up to the last number of years, the elective conference, but particularly into the elections, when a politician stands up and goes, we will offer free internet access, it's a basic human right and it's part of our election manifesto, right? Can we see that in writing, and can we see that being implemented? Now. Not after the elections. Let's roll it out now so that we can start benefiting our people sooner rather than later. I think holding government to account and then holding the private sector to account equally. They are just as responsible. Yeah. Everybody needs to work together, but we need to do it now.
Wesley, any?
Yeah, free education, and so
yes.
Why not free open access?
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to just probably end off by saying how I started is that I think there's going to be quite a rapid growth in digital skills,
yes,
development and transformation. There's going to be quite an extensive rollout for that in all different sectors, public, private, and so on. Yep.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Anything?
Okay, so I know I came late.
Yeah.
Well, I know I came.
And we have run out of time, so quick.
Yeah, I think,
quick.
I don't think anything major. I think a lot of things are going to be said in 2019. I don't think that we're necessarily at a tipping point. I think that there's still a lot of momentum being built, and I think it'll probably take another 2 years or so before anything major happens. But there will be builds of sustainability happening, communities finding ways to prop up their own routes to connectivity, and I think government will take steps. I think the market will begin migrating in that direction, but those are all moving parts that will all find their way to a destination we all hope to get to.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen anytime within the next 12 to 18 months, I don't think.
All right, so, you know, but we're hopeful for 2019, and I think that it is the data access that we talked about is absolutely important. Education, but also then bringing that open access into the education system to fuel something, and then maybe we'll have this tipping point then that, you know, where actually the access meets then education, and we have some kind of exponential growth in this area of know-how and access, hopefully. And so I want to thank you all for those insights. I think it's been absolutely, I've learned a lot, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I hope that we can continue this discussion as well, because it is absolutely important. And we need to find solutions, and I think that we've been very solution-oriented on this panel tonight, which is absolutely lovely. So thank you. Thank you very, very much. And thank you all at home for participating online and engaging in this discussion. And we hope to see you all next year as well, where we're going to continue these discussions on a regular basis. And I'm wishing you all a lovely December break, and keep safe on the roads and enjoy. Thank you. Thanks. Great. There you have it.